Hi, folks. I'm Dennis Wholey. Thanks so much for joining us. Each week, This Is America offers you interesting guests with something important to say. On location, personal conversations, balanced roundtable discussions, and informal mini documentaries. It's always fun to kind of look back and pick out some special moments, kind of a this is who we are, this is what we do, this is how we do it. A recap of last season next. This is America. This is America is made possible by Hyundai Motor America, maker of the 2006 Sonata. The American Legacy Foundation. Tobacco-related illnesses kill about 165,000 women each year. You should know. AmericanLegacy.org. The National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. Korean Air, the Korea National Tourism Organization. The city of Paducah, Kentucky, located in McCracken County, home of the Paducah Artist Relocation Program, and Paducah Bank. And the American Life TV Network. Last season, we spent a good chunk of time out of the studio visiting guests on location. So to get us started, here's just a few of our recent guests. Probably many you already know.
You had some of these members of Congress who are marinated in corporate cash and corporate influence say 50 million Americans can't be wrong, although they've had a record of saying 50 million Americans can be wrong if a few corporations have dumped enough in their campaign coffers.
But we're there now. We got to get it done. Get it done meaning leave that place with a representative republic in place so that it doesn't break out into a civil war and so that it doesn't set in motion a lot of very negative things, whereas it can be very positive if we do it right.
Have you become a caricature of yourself?
Oh, sure. I mean, I'm sure was started as a bad cartoon of myself. I'm honestly, I'm not very self-aware, so it's not clear what that caricature would be.
Interestingly, women who are still breaking barriers in those fields are the women of today. So you have Margaret Chase Smith, who was the first woman to be reelected to the Senate 4 times. And then you have Geraldine Ferraro, who was the first woman nominee for vice president. And you have Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman Supreme Court justice. So I interviewed them as contemporary women, still breaking barriers in the same field, but they had such great stories.
When you're in high school, tennis, basketball, captain of the baseball team.
Yeah.
What position did you play?
Shortstop.
Shortstop?
And third base. I was at third base a while, but I became known as the human sieve at third base.
I was a hockey player. They called me red light because it was always going in. Zing. Yeah, right fast.
But I could at short. I had a little more time.
Were you good? Were you any good?
I was a pretty good short and second baseman and a better hitter. I hit home runs as a batter, and so I was captain of the team. I loved that, and we didn't have a football team, but I played basketball. I was on the basketball team.
But I've talked to so many Republicans across the country in the course of the last year or so who've said to me, you know, I've been a Republican all my life. I want to stay a Republican, but I don't like what the party's doing now. I'm not comfortable with it. I don't know where it's going.
The biological mother died when the boy was 6 or 7 years old. And Nkosi grew up in this white, middle-class household in one of the nice suburbs of Johannesburg. And he and his mother became famous in a way because she had raised him to see himself as normal, even though he had AIDS. And one day he threw her a curve and said, "Mom, I'd like to go to school. Since I'm so normal, I want to go to school." The school said, "No, you can't because you have AIDS." And they didn't know what they were getting into with this woman, Gail Johnson, because she fought that battle in the papers, on TV, on the radio, in the courts. And eventually she won, and there is now on the books in South Africa something called Nkosi's law, which says that no child who is HIV positive or has AIDS shall be kept from public schools. And so he went to school.
And all I know, with the exception of my mom, I didn't expect anyone to get along with me. And what bothers me is that it didn't bother me at all. It really didn't.
Frequently, we present fascinating and entertaining guests who you may not know by name, but you should, and now you will. Have you ever sat down as you're fantasizing and said, this would be a reality show that I would invent if I were going to invent a reality show? What would you come up with?
Something that would humiliate executives like Rupert Murdoch here, and even though I like him, who's the Barry Diller here, and certainly Jeff Zucker, the guy at NBC.
Oh, turn it around to the
tastes
boss.
are so low. Yeah, just have them all dipped in, you know, cattle innards or whatever it is they're doing to people on Fear Factor these days. Have them humiliated and for money. Of course, in a way they are. They just don't realize it. That's what their lives are, being humiliated in the pursuit of money.
Did you ever ride with your dad on the railroad?
Let me tell you, riding with my father on a steam locomotive.
Oh, you would be up front, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. With him driving with the regulator. And as we're going along, my father was a Shakespearean scholar. He would say, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise." And a very curious thing is, he was always saying to me, quoting this funeral speech, "Caesar, beware the Ides of March." He loved the rhetoric of it. And when I had my great battle with Rupert Murdoch later on, it was on the Ides of March.
When did the style evolve? The boldness, the brightness, the bigness, the energy, the sweeping strokes.
Well, like when you're a kid, when you're a young artist, there are even different materials than they use today. Today, the sky's the limit. You can use anything. There are people who say painting is dead. You can do paintings without paint and all that. So that's okay, whatever's going on. But when I was a student, there weren't acrylic colors yet, acrylic paints. We painted with oil and watercolor and designers' colors and tempers and things. Very restricting. But then Jackson Pollock comes on. When I was a first-year student, Jackson Pollock broke on the scene with the enamels and pouring the paint all over. And then the whole thing exploded. You know, people were throwing rags in the paintings. You could do anything. But it was a very, very exciting time.
Ronald Reagan, a hero?
Oh, my gosh, yes. I worked with him many a year, and he was the truth. He's the true thing. You know, I'll tell you the thing about Ronald Reagan.
Must have been fun to be around
Oh,
him.
he was incredible to be around. You had to feel things were going to go well when you're around him. He's this incredible optimist.
Well, that was two of you.
Yeah, there was, but he really exuded it. But I'll tell you what he had that I have not found often in others with whom I've worked who have sought higher office, you know, whether any office, Congress or Senate. People here in Washington are not humble. And I think that's one of the finest virtues you can have. Ronald Reagan was completely humble.
Now, in fact, I think ultimately the problem with Arafat was that the Palestinian cause was an abstraction. I was talking before about, you know, negotiating on arms control was an abstraction. This needed to be something not an abstraction. Right. For Arafat, every Palestinian casualty or fatality was not an individual to be mourned, but a martyr to be glorified for the sake of the cause. So he loved the Palestinian people, but he was quite willing to have the Palestinian individuals suffer.
Do you think he controlled violence? Did he permit it? Did he wink at it? Did he sanction it? Did he encourage it?
He tolerated it.
If you look at the core philosophy of the Democratic or the liberal point of view, what do you say?
Well, you know, the other side then is the left gets it wrong because the left doesn't get it. The right gets it wrong, the left doesn't get it. How did the Democratic Party, that was linked vitally to a civil rights movement led by black churches just a few decades ago, now get successfully portrayed as the secular party, the one hostile to religion? Where would we be if the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had kept his faith to himself? So I want to say to them, if you are motivated by moral values, and many Democrats are, let the values shine through. If you're motivated by faith, let your faith shine through. Don't be afraid of a moral conversation about politics.
And the fact that we're in Iraq, the fact that we've got 150,000 troops there, is forcing the House of Saud to decide, are they with the terrorists or are they not? And I think there's a division in the House of Saud. There's some who are supportive and others who aren't. But it's their funding of the madrasas that are inflaming the youth around the Muslim part of the world. And we're pressuring very hard to stop it.
You know, part of the fun of doing This Is America is that some of our guests surprise us and go in unexpected directions. Listen to Pat Buchanan and Bill O'Reilly.
Bush won in the Gulf War. He got the Russians and the Chinese to sign on, the British and the French to help fight it, the Germans and the Japanese to pay for it, even the Arabs, even Hafiz al-Assad, the Syrians, sent troops into Saudi Arabia. He got the whole world behind him, and he drove Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. The president did the same in Afghanistan. The difference in Iraq is when the president declared we're going into Iraq, in effect, the entire Arab world said, why? Iraq did not attack the United States, doesn't threaten the United States, doesn't want war with the United States, had no role in 9/11. Why are you attacking the Iraqis? And so you've lost all of your Arab allies, and the Europeans said basically the same thing. What does this have to do with finding Osama bin Laden and running down al-Qaeda, which is spread over 60 countries? So the president isolated us basically from the world and from our allies, and then he drove up to Baghdad. And so this is why I think we find ourselves in the hellish mess we're in today.
You got the number one cable
number
news
one
show
everything.
in whatever.
Number one TV, number one radio, number one book. We're just number one.
Okay.
And I don't say that flippantly.
Did they know when they say Bill O'Reilly, the conservative's conservative?
But that's ridiculous.
Wait a minute, finish the question, okay? That one of your heroes is Bobby Kennedy?
Well, they don't care.
Well, they should.
But they don't.
What a wonderful thing for you to put in the book.
But that's true.
Why did you like him so?
Because he was a crusader. I mean, he was looking out for the folks. He wanted to break the mafia. Why did he want to break the mafia? It didn't affect Bobby Kennedy. In fact, helped his brother get elected president. So why did he want to do it? Because he was outraged that these people were hurting folks. Why did he want to right the civil rights wrongs? Didn't matter to Bobby Kennedy. He had his money. What does he care? But he went down there and he broke the cabal, the racist cabal in the South, because he was outraged. Very few people are like that. It's all about them, as we talked about in the beginning of this interview. With him, Bobby Kennedy, it wasn't about him. All right? It was about other people, and he took very courageous stands. Now, he could because his brother was president, fine. But he was very effective in a way that he did it.
We often choose to produce programs which focus on topics of importance. And for those programs, we invite guests who are the very top leaders in their field. So in this segment, we'll take a look at healthcare, education, and world poverty. When we use the phrase achievement gap, what really are we saying there?
Well, I think when many people talk about achievement gap, I think in many instances that might be a code word for lack of performance on the part of minority students. But see, the gap includes things other than minority students. You have a gap in boys and girl achievement. You have a gap in terms of science and math achievement. There are all kinds of gaps. But I do believe when people talk about gaps and how the gap needs to be closed, I think in most instances they are talking about the racial gap, the gap between minority students and white students.
Overall health care in America, these are some of the phrases. Perfect storm, dysfunctional, inefficient, the system is broken. What is going on?
Well, we've got a big problem in our country. It is true that our healthcare system is not working well. In fact, it may be doing harm as well as doing good. And we've got to fix this long term.
How so harm?
Well, because look at medical errors, misdiagnoses.
Deaths in hospitals.
All kinds of things happen, deaths in hospitals in the many thousands. We've got to do a much better job of fixing our healthcare system. The problem is that it is so big and it's such a giant undertaking that it's very hard for the Congress to focus on something that big. And those rising healthcare costs and all those uninsured, they drive so many other things. They cost huge expenditures.
45 million uninsured?
45 million uninsured. We've got to come to grips with that. We have to solve that.
I gather that the United States' position, the IMF, the World Bank, are kind of saying to a lot of these countries, tighten your belt, behave, be more like us, and we'll do it in small steps.
That's right. You know, the presumption is if you're poor, fix yourself. That's partly the American spirit, you know, pick yourself up by the bootstraps. A lot of the places I'm going, people don't have boots, they don't have bootstraps. Telling them to tighten their belts makes no sense, they have no belts.
Right.
People are so impoverished that there's just not the realistic chance that you just lift yourself up by the willpower alone. But then you ask why. And you look at Africa, which is really the epicenter of extreme poverty on the planet right now. And there are lots of factors that are deep, intrinsic barriers, not unsolvable, but awfully big to be solved from inside alone. Let me give a few examples. Malaria, devastating disease, will kill probably about 3 million children this year, will upset the whole economy of the sub-Saharan African region, stopping or frustrating tourism, stopping foreign investment, stopping migration. Africa has the worst malaria conditions in the world, not because they're more corrupt or they don't care and so forth, but because of the kind of mosquitoes and the kind of climate. When you put it together, the burden of malaria in Africa is simply 10 times higher or more than in any other part of the world.
Add to that AIDS, huh?
Well, then AIDS came in massive amounts, and nobody even understands properly exactly why the transmission is so high. And there's a lot of mystery. Maybe it's the so-called viral subtype that plays a role. Maybe it's population genetics that is playing some role. Of course, it could be cultural patterns or sexual patterns, but it could also be that because of the heavy burden of other diseases that so many people in sub-Saharan Africa face and are challenged by, the transmission of the disease might be accelerated.
Each season, we leave our home base here in Washington, D.C. to produce informal mini-documentaries on location. Last year, we were in Paducah, Kentucky, Montgomery, Alabama, and Seoul, Korea. This Is America may be best known for its signature roundtable discussions. Politically balanced, thoughtful conversation with no yelling and screaming.
Had this been a much bigger win in terms of percentages, then maybe I'd buy it. But this was, just remember, had there been 150,000 votes in Ohio that went the other way, this fellow could have lost the popular vote by 3 million and could have won the Electoral College. Now, that's pretty close. That's a pretty narrow edge. When you look at the electoral vote count, it's 286 to 254. It's not very wide.
You can say that in any election.
Yeah, in fact, that's not true.
What makes This Is America so meaningful for us are the extra special moments when our guests share their very being with us. These warm and personal moments are about as human as it gets.
I was downtown in the so-called white part of town in Tulsa. And I was standing on the curb about to cross, and the traffic with the light was turned green. And I saw this woman, this white woman, who had stepped off the curb, but I could see that she didn't know where to go. And then I saw this cane in her hand. I said, "My good deed." I rushed up to her. I said, "May I help you across the street?" She said, "Yes, thank you so much." And we started out to cheerfully across the street. And she asked me if I was white or colored. And I said, "I'm colored." She said, "Get your filthy hands off me." Well, I took my filthy hands off her, and I left her in the middle of the streets. She preferred to be run down, I suppose, by an automobile than to be escorted across the street with a black hand.
I'm also thinking of what was the most fun you ever had.
Well, I've had a lot of pleasures in life. My avocations are sailing and skiing.
What about the ocean has drawn you to be such an avid sailor?
Well, the mystique of the ocean is everywhere acknowledged. People write poems about it, and they write symphonies about it. it exercises a magic which takes with some people and doesn't with other people. There were 10 children in my family, and we were all taught the same things. There was only one, me, who ended up wanting to sail. One wanted to play golf, one tennis. So it doesn't catch everybody equally, but if it does catch you, it tends to do so rather thoroughly, which is why I've crossed the ocean 4 times in a sailboat to gratify that particular appetite.
You don't screw around with the ocean, do you? It's powerful.
Oh, yeah. That's right. The ocean is the enemy. You can exploit it, you can tame it sometimes, but you must never, never deny its final sort of apocalyptic power.
I had just come back from Vietnam. It was December 1965. And I was in the apartment just for probably no more than 15 minutes, and my father was in the kitchen, and he was cursing and carrying on and being provocative. And my mother was in the room. She was starting to cry. I began repacking my sea bag, and my father got into the doorway very threatening, menacingly. And my mother was crying. I said, "Mommy, I'd love to stay, but I can't." I began repacking it, and my father was cursing and threatening for no reason. This was just him. And as I started to go, he stood there with his hands on his hip. And I went up to him. And in that moment, there were only 2 people in the world, as he yelled, him and me. It was as if time stopped. I was beyond anger. I was beyond rage. I could hear my heart beat. And I looked at him, and I said, "I'm not the kid you used to beat up. You hit me now. You try to stop me. You get in my way. I will take you down." Understand, when I went to the Marine Corps, I was 5'10", 156 pounds. I had been in the Marine Corps now almost 5 years. I was 6 foot, almost 6'1", and I weighed 204 pounds. I had a 28-inch waist, and I had a very bad attitude. And I was frozen in that moment. And I expected him to hit me once, but I wasn't that little boy. He was going to get a chance to hit me once. And he looked at me, and I waited for it. Instead, he reached over and he touched my finger. And he looked down, and he said, "Please stay." It was as if someone pulled a pin. I mean, he shrunk. It was like in a cartoon. The character shrinks. He shrunk.
Tell me about going to the party as the rear end of a horse.
Well, that was actually when I was a mere student, although an older one in my case. We went as a tableau with some friends to a party that Brzezinski was having, actually. And so, you know, you get into somebody's in the front and I was in the rear, and it was stuffy.
I want to talk a little bit about the assassination attempt on the president, and you were right beside him when he was shot, and God love him, Jim Brady and the Secret Service agent and
the policeman
as well. What one thing, not so much at that moment, and the 2-car heading toward George Washington Hospital, but what one memory sticks out in all that chaos and craziness at the hospital?
I think what hit me when we got to the hospital, because I didn't know where we were going.
You were in the second car.
I was in the second car, and he got out of the car standing up. But when he collapsed and we got into the emergency room, all I could think of was Parkland.
Yeah, yes.
I was thinking to myself, my God, this must have been what it was. And we're doing it all over again. And here I was in the middle of it, in this chaos in the hospital with them throwing people out of the emergency rooms and police all over the place. And it sort of calmed down after 15 minutes or so. I mean, they got the place organized, but that was my initial impression.
As a program note, we'll be at the Performing Arts Center in Paducah, Kentucky on October 22nd for a special performance plus interview on stage with political satirist Mark Russell. On November 11th, we'll be there with theater legend Carol Channing. For ticket information, call 270-450-4444 or visit the website thecarsoncenter.org. To help hurricane victims, the NEA is providing relief specifically to public school employees, regardless of their being a union member or not. For further information, visit NEA.org. To get in touch with us or to learn more about the audio podcast of this week's program, please visit our website at thisisamerica.net. This is America is made possible by Hyundai Motor America, maker of the 2006 Sonata. The American Legacy Foundation. Tobacco-related illnesses kill about 165,000 women each year. You should know. AmericanLegacy.org. The National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. Korean Air, the Korea National Tourism Organization. The city of Paducah, Kentucky, located in McCracken County, home of the Paducah Artist Relocation Program, and Paducah Bank. And the American Life TV Network.